I will be portraying Homer as a photographer and the epic poem The Odyssey as a perfect photograph. Photography is capturing the essence of an object and portraying the way you see it. Basically, photographers don't make what they take pictures of. They simply use cameras and techniques to show their point of view of whatever they are capturing. For example, this is a picture taken by the famous photographer Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams did not make this flower. He simply used the techniques that we will be talking about to show his point of view of this flower. This is similar to what Homer is doing with the Odyssey. Homer technically didn't write the Odyssey. The Odyssey is an oral story that was passed down throughout the generations and began long before Homer was born. But Homer uses techniques similar to those used in photography to express his point of view of the oral story and figuratively take a photograph expressing his Greek culture. The first thing I'll be talking about is a part of the camera, which is the film advance, which is right here on the camera, and I'll pass this around after my next slide. The film advance progresses the film inside the camera so that the photographer can keep taking his or her pictures. This relates to Athena in the Odyssey because Athena keeps the story progressing. Athena is the supernatural guide. She helps Odysseus throughout his no story, which is his homeward journey, and even pleads with gods to help him get home. Once Odysseus is home, she helps him defeat the suitors and defend his oikos. Homer uses Athena to illuminate part of his Greek culture and express the Greek belief that everything happens due to the omnipotent gods. The next part of the camera that Homer uses is the focus ring. The focus ring creates the focus within a picture, or basically draws the viewer's eye to a point or object within the camera. This is just like Eumaeus, who accentuates and puts the focus on themes within the story. Eumaeus is not just a swineherd, but the ideal Greek man. Throughout the story, he expresses xenia, piety, and loyalty. In Book 15, Eumaeus is very xenious when Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, goes to his house. He lacks pride and continues his job even though his lord was gone. We even find out that he was the first one to offer sacrifices to the gods when it was apparent that Odysseus should have been home. On page 264 it says, Odysseus dropped off to sleep. It rejoiced Odysseus' heart to see him care for the herd so while his lord was gone. So we often see Eumaeus bringing out these important themes, and the focus of the camera is just right here, or right here. And I can pass this around. Now I'm going to talk about the 5 components of a photograph that photographers use to make photographs more appealing. The first component is repetition. Repetition is used in photography to draw in the viewer's eye and kind of just make it look more interesting. Repetition is also frequently found in the Odyssey. The story of Agamemnon is repeated, epithets are repeated. Repetition is also used because we see Odysseus being set back in his journey frequently, and Penelope's weaving and unweaving and then reweaving of her shroud is also repetition, obviously. And on page 22, it says, so every day she wove on the great loom, but every night by torchlight she unwove it, and so for 3 years she deceived the Achaeans. This makes sense because repetition is frequently used in epic poems, just like photography. And it's used as a touchstone to help the poet keep his place, so Greek poets would have used it so that they wouldn't lose their place when telling the epic, and the audience would be able to keep track of the story better. The next component is symmetry. A common rule followed in photography using symmetry is the rule of thirds. It's known as the golden ratio, and it divides the photograph into 1/3 and 2/3, as you can see in those pictures. The Odyssey also follows this rule. Like the first 2/3 of the Odyssey, Odysseus is away from home, and the last third of the Odyssey is him being home and redeeming his oikos. This leads me to wonder, why does Homer manipulate time? I think Homer does this to emphasize the importance of a man's oikos. The first two-thirds, while Odysseus is away, shows the pain and turmoil of being away from home. Losing his home would mean everything was taken away from him. This also sets the scene for the denouement when Odysseus returns home and redeems his oikos. The next component is depth of field. A picture's depth of field depends on the aperture. If it has a shallow depth of field, like this picture, then the object that is in focus is really clear, but everything else is blurred. A deep depth of field, like the two black and white pictures, will show all the details in the background, middle ground, and foreground. I think that Homer would have used a deep depth of field when writing the Odyssey due to storytelling within the epic. When reading the Odyssey, there were many times a story that did not pertain to the initial plot of the Odyssey would sporadically appear, such as Agamemnon telling his murder story in the underworld, Ajax and Odysseus' quarrel also told in the underworld, and Helen tells stories about how cunning and tricky Odysseus was in the Trojan War. We hear Phemius the minstrel and Demodocus the bard telling important Greek stories, and Menelaus and Nestor also share war stories with the audience. These stories add depth to the Odyssey, making ties to Greek mythology, Greek tradition, and to the predecessor of the Odyssey, the Iliad. This adds layers to the story, exposing important aspects of Greek culture that would have been important to Homer's audience at the time. The next component is contrast. Contrast is important to a photograph because the contradicting colors and values accentuate each other. The Odyssey creates a similar effect using foils. For example, it's apparent that Clytemnestra functions as a foil to highlight Penelope's unbending loyalty while Odysseus is gone. Clytemnestra cheats on Agamemnon while he's at war, dreads his return home, and even helps plot and execute her husband's murder with her lover. However, Penelope remains the perfect wife, refuses to remarry even though Odysseus said to once Telemachus grew a beard, and sorrowfully anticipates the return of her husband. Another foil within the story is the father and son relationship between Agamemnon and Orestes and Odysseus and Telemachus. Orestes avenged his father's death by killing his mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover. Telemachus strives to emulate Orestes and is pushed to step up and do something about the suitors who are dishonoring his father while he's away. The last component of photography is viewpoint. Viewpoint can change a picture completely. For example, if you're taking a picture in front of a tree, it's going to convey a completely different message than if you were to take it from above the tree or lying below the tree. These different angles or new viewpoints can change the way you see an object or look at the big picture. This relates to the way Homer uses narration. For most of the epic, Homer uses a third-person omniscient narrator. This makes sense because Homer isn't actually in the Odyssey. However, Odysseus becomes the first-person narrator in books 9 through 12. I think Homer does this so we can see into the mind of Odysseus, and we can see his perspective, why he made the decisions he did, and how he truly felt about being away from home. Otherwise, some of his decisions might have been confusing to us. Homer uses these techniques and the camera parts to portray his point of view of the timeless legend and explicate his culture using the Odyssey.